Hello everyone, welcome and Merry Christmas. This is the festive tech calendar for 2021. My name is Ryan Murphy. I'm a compliance lead for Epic Global, and today I'm going to be walking you through the M365 compliance solutions. And the main ones being Microsoft Compliance Manager, Microsoft Information Protection, Information Governance, Records Management, Insider Risk Management, and Compliance, Communications Compliance. I'm going to give you an overview of what they offer and how they can help your organization. First of all, I'd just like you to jump over onto Twitter, look up the #Cloud Family and the Festive Tech Calendar for 2021. We're actually running a charity at the moment for Girls Who Code, so if you could spare a little bit of cash, we'd really appreciate it. Let's jump into the session. Taking a look at Compliance Manager then. So Compliance Manager is broken up into a couple of areas. So we have Compliance Score here. Now, I see lots of people going into analysis paralysis when it comes to the compliance score, where they're trying to get it up as high as they possibly can. Now, in some scenarios, and I say some, and I use that word emphatically, you will actually start to reduce the collaboration in your environment if you just go for an all-out 100% score percentage here. So take a look at your environment. Take a look at the requests coming in from any regulators that you deal with. Speak to your compliance, legal, risk teams, security teams, and figure out what the best configurations are for your organization. Only then should you come into Compliance Manager and take a look through the improvement actions of what you can achieve, the configurations behind them, consequently increasing your risk score here. Now, one of the first things people ask me is, okay, we want to move into 365 compliance. Where do we start? Do we start with labeling? Do we start with information governance? Do we start with, where do we start, Ryan? And I will always say Compliance Manager. Take a look at the improvement actions that you can do now to help your environment to become more secure and more compliant. Okay? Now, looking through these key improvement actions here, these are the ones that are dedicated to what you have in your tenant. And there's some very easy ones here that you can just come in and enable. Enable self-service password reset. Again, one thing that most organizations would want to switch on. Manage roles-based access. Again, another one that most companies would like to have switched on. Require mobile devices to use encryption. Again, some of these will be absolutely perfect for your environment. Some of them won't. So as I said, make sure you have a clear indication of which one of these you want to use, or these assessment templates or improvement actions you want to use based on your internal discussions and based on the discussions or the regulations that come from the regulators themselves. Let's take a look through Compliance Manager then. So in here, we have an extensive list of the improvement actions that you can take. Now, as we come into the improvement actions pane then, we can see that we have some of the options from the previous overview page. Now, this in itself will go through all of the assessments that you've got in here. The data protection baseline comes as a default. Any other assessment or any other regulatory assessment alignment, you will have to add in yourself, which I will show you in a second. So we have the assessments here. Now in my environment, I have a number of them that I've connected in, mostly because I deal with these regulatory items on a daily basis, customers on a daily basis. Therefore, I'll be showing them through what these assessment templates come with and the configurations that they come with as well. So on this page, you just have everything that you've added in as an assessment template and the improvement actions that are actually aligned with that particular assessment template. Then we have the solutions. Let's take a look in here. So within the solutions page, then, as you can clearly see, these are all mapped into Azure and Microsoft 365, Office 365. You can take a look through these, so if there's anything specific that you want to go through, let's say Microsoft Information Protection, you can click on this particular item, you can open this up, and it will bring you straight through to that particular solution. Furthermore, you can actually use this to increase your score visibility with what that particular solution offers, where that category lies, where that solution in the category lies, and then the regulations, if you've got any mapped in, where they would actually be published from, if you like. Then we have the action type, so it's a technical one, so it requires some configuration, if you like. And then we have the groups themselves of where they belong to. So let me just make this a little bit wider. I can't. But we can see here we have FINRA, GDPR, and another one. And again, depending on where those particular configurations are aligned to, you'll have the opportunity then to come in here under the groups and see what that mapping is. You have remaining tasks, what improvement actions that you need to go through. And then you have open solution itself, as I've just shown you. Let's take a look at the assessments. So on the assessments page, this is where I've added in any particular assessments or any regulatory assessments that I'm actually mapped into or have been working with. As you can see here, I have FINRA, Sec 17, GDPR, and data protection. These purple markers here indicate that there's a pending update. So there's been a change to that regulatory requirement, or there's been a change to the configuration inside of Microsoft 365. Therefore, giving you the indication that this needs to be looked at. You need to go into the pending update and accept it. But I'll show you that in just a moment. But clicking on FINRA, and once this is opened up, we can see everything that is specific to that FINRA regulation. The same applies to any other regulatory assessment that you have in here. I'll show you another one in a moment just for keepsake. But when we're entered into the FINRA assessment, we can see we have an overview, what version it is, what's in scope, the status, the about. You can even click on the official FINRA documentation. Then you have the progress. So I have currently in my environment 31% the way through the assessment progress. I then have the improvement actions below. So we have use default DLP policies, block email, block outdated activate controls. As you can see, it gives you a lot of information in here. Then we come down to the control status. So this will give you a visualization of what you have in progress, what has failed, and any other. Okay. So let's take a look at the controls themselves. So again, within here, you have more of a visualization of what those controls are when you're working with these FINRA assessment templates or improvement actions. Then you have down here as well additional information that you can go through. All right, you've got identify and assess risks, and there's 3 particular status topics there that you can choose from and work with. Then we have your improvement actions. Within the improvement actions, and here are the actual improvement actions with the configurations that you can apply to them. So we have apply sensitivity labels to protect financial data. So if we were to select this, this would take us through onto another page where it gives you that particular types of configuration. Now, looking through here, we have again on the left hand side an overview and a data source. Now, this data source here can be changed from manual to parent. It's up to you how you can work that. And then you have an assign to, so you can assign this to a particular person or a particular team in your environment that looks after that side of the compliance solution, if you like, or that type of configuration or regulatory requirement. Then we have the actual rest of the overview, which just gives general information. Then we have implementation. So you can work your way through here and get the advice from Microsoft on what these implementation notes are actually for. Then at the bottom, you have prerequisites and licensing requirements. And then you have the launch now, which again will launch. There's the actual compliance center itself under information protection. So you have all of the links and all of the information inside of each of the improvement actions inside of the assessment templates themselves. Now, do note, some of the assessment templates are not included with your licensing model. They're actually an additional cost. They're an additional cost because Microsoft have got their legal minds together and actually built these out for you. So the work's been done for you. All you would need to do is come in, find the assessment, select the associated cost to it, and purchase it. That's it. All of the information, all those great legal minds at Microsoft have already built this out for you. So under the testing phase then, we have the ability to go in here and add in testing notes, testing data. So for example, if I wanted to edit the testing details in here from an additional notes perspective, I can click on it here and I can add some relevant data in here. This I find is very good. If you're working with a number of compliance teams around the world, you can actually add in a lot of information in here. So you can say, I've done this on this day and I've accepted this risk, or we've accepted this solution, or it's been approved for whatever. You can keep a running commentary within here. Standards and regulations, then you can just work through these controls here and basically just map out which of these segments that you would like to work through. So you've got identity and access risks, okay? You've got privacy control, and obviously each of these assessment templates will have different variations of the terminologies and technologies within here. And then we have the documents. So from the document side then, if you have any relevant documentation that you want to add to this particular assessment or improvement action within the regulation, you would simply just come to attach document, select the attached document, and add that into here as well. Again, this works well if you have a particular compliance design that you want to add up into here, or some compliance configuration notes that you want to add up into here, or even just the regulatory notes themselves to say, here is why we're doing this, here is why, you know, the information protection configuration is built out a specific way, and it's because of X, Y, Z, and this is actually noted down in this particular documentation here. So let's go back into the firmware assessment itself. Then we have the Microsoft actions. So these are the improvement actions that Microsoft have gone through to make sure Microsoft's side have actually alluded to these particular regulations themselves. Okay, so that gives you some comfort as an adopter of the service that Microsoft actually have made the effort to go through the compliance assessment itself and configure any necessary configuration on their side, on the items that they manage within the cloud. Let's take a look at some other assessments just to have a quick review. Let's select GDPR. I'm sure everybody knows that one by now. Coming through to the GDPR one then, as we can see, again, just a standard configuration and information on the left-hand side. And then we have exactly the same as what we had in the FINRA, but with different improvement actions this time. So these improvement actions are dedicated to the GDPR for Microsoft 365. And all of these improvement actions will help you as an organization to come to that configuration state where you are within the GDPR from a Microsoft 365 perspective. Again, we have exactly the same from a FINRA perspective. We have the graphical nature of what that control status breakdown is. Then we have your improvement actions. Again, going through each of these improvement actions. I must say at this point that these are guidance configurations from Microsoft. So each of these assessment templates is a guidance for you to map into that particular regulatory requirement. It is down to you as an organization to make sure that these configurations are 100% complete for you to get that regulator sign off, if you like. So through here we have all of the particular items that map back to GDPR. Again, from a Microsoft perspective, any technology, any solution, any roles or features from the Microsoft cloud side, here's where you can come in and see where Microsoft's stance is on this. And of course, everything's passed at this moment in time. Then we can take a look at the review update. So as it states here, there's a pending update to this assessment. So let's take a quick look at what that is. So when selecting it, it gives you another splash page on the right-hand side. Here we can go through and see what the actual information is. And it states here that this was changed. The update was provided by Microsoft on the 15th of October. Now you can go through these update notes and have a read through to see what this specific update is relating to. And then you can go to the actual change details themselves here. You can see that there's 20 actions added, 8 actions removed, 42 controls modified, 5 control families modified. You can come through here, take a good read through, and at the bottom then we can just click accept update. That will then publish these changes into your environment. And that's an overview of Compliance Manager. Here is where you'll find all of the assessment templates that Microsoft have available. Should you want to choose any of these, you would come into assessment templates, and then you would either search for a particular one within the search box here, or you would go through and find that particular one that's relevant to your environment. And as I say, some of these are available for you out of the box, and then the premium templates do incur a cost. Depending on your licensing model, they will incur a cost, but it covers for every regulation, I think, that's particularly out there at the moment that allows M365 integration. And that covers the assessment templates and compliance manager in whole. Now let's take a look at data classification. So under data classification, you have a number of features. You have the overview, trainable classifiers, sensitive information types, exact data match, content explorer, and activity explorer. In the data classification overview, this gives you an insight into your environment of what sensitivity labels or retention labels, where they're being used, what their top activities are, what their top locations are. And furthermore, you have the ability now to include the Azure Information Protection Scanner information. So if you have that running in your environment, you can now come in here and take a look at that data. So just as an overview, then we have the top sensitive information types of which have been found in my environment. You can hover over them and get the value of them. Then we have the top sensitivity labels which should apply to content. Then we have the top retention labels applied to content. We have AIP, of course, top activities detected. So 123 files accessed, 89 labels applied, 39 DLP rules matched. And then we have locations where sensitivity labels are applied. So a majority of them are in SharePoint or OneDrive. And then we have locations where retention labels are actually applied. So we can see that 153 items were labeled within Exchange, 44 in OneDrive, and then 96 in SharePoint Online. Next, we have trainable classifiers. Now, trainable classifiers, if you think of it, a trainable classifier is a tool that you can train to recognize various types of content by giving it samples to look at. So if you wanted to build out a trainable classifier to look for a specific type of document, whether that be an invoice or a bank statement or whatever the case may be, you can actually include that documentation into your trainable classifier, and it would then go off and start to learn what that is, what that document is, and so on and so forth. Very, very good for large organizations where they're working through adding in a trainable classifier to protect a certain type of document. I see this being used a lot for financial services or for software houses where they're building out lots of code and so on and so forth. Within here, you have quite a few now already included trainable classifiers out of the box from a Microsoft perspective. So you have source code here, you have resumes all CVs, you have profanity, you have offensive language, you have discrimination, business tax, business procurement, business legal, business IT, business IP, healthcare, HR, and so on and so forth. There's a number of these that you can use to take your own advantage. Then we have sensitive information types. So sensitive information types give you the ability to detect certain types of information. As you can see from the first screen here, you have ABA routing numbers. You also have credit card numbers, lots of financial information in here. You can also build out your own. I have lots of customers that build out their own sensitive information types with regexes or keywords or keyword dictionaries. These can be used to go and detect that type of data. So if you have a credit card number, for example, and you want that to be detected upon data exfiltration or through sharing externally, you can wrap that into a DLP policy. You can also include that into a Teams DLP policy as well. So if you're allowing a certain number of people within the environment to share that credit card information, but a bunch of others not to share that information, you can actually put a prevention in place with DLP to block that. So it will detect that credit card number and then prevent that from being shared externally. Most of these will wrap into some type of regulatory requirement or local data laws. We have GDPR in here, which is made up of a number of these sensitive information types. We have HIPAA in here as well, which are made up of a number of these sensitive information types. And we have a number around the US and UK type of information, US bank account, social security number, US ITIN number, and passport number, national insurance number from a UK perspective also. So this gives you the opportunity to look for that type of data or detect on that type of sensitive information type. These can also be used into auto labeling service side and client side, which I will go through in just a moment. But these are really, really good for you to be able to detect the type of information that you want. Now we have exact data match. Now, previous sensitive information types work off patterns or key evidence, such as the criteria you put in them, like social security number or credit card number. And then they have a character proximity and they have a confidence level. But with exact data match, what you're getting is you're getting the ability to actually match the data that's found within like a document and within the columns and the rows within the document with an actual document that could change what's inside of it. So you're talking about the columns and the rows, first name, last name, date of birth, social security number, or even national insurance number. With this structure and with the data that's changing under those columns or headers, the exact data match schema will allow you to build out that schema template that maps back to that particular document. So as long as those rows and columns stay the same and the data within them changes, the EDM will allow you to apply that to other possibilities within the compliance solutions like retention perhaps, or even DLP and so on and so forth. EDMs, I see them being used quite a lot, more in the larger organizations, given the fact that they're time consuming to set up. But once they're set up, they're incredible to use, so it's a good thing to look at. Then we have Content Explorer. Content Explorer will allow you to look at where the sensitive information types or the sensitivity labels or the retention labels that you configured, what documentation they've been applied to. So as you can see here, we have a sensitive information type of a markup of a 385. So if we look in the Exchange, we're able to see that here that Irvin S has 300 items inside of his mailbox. Now, if I click on here, we're able to see all the matches that Irvin has made. Now, just bear in mind, Content Explorer actually has two different permissions. One of them will allow you to view and browse through these top level information types here. However, another permission here is around the actual content view. So if I was to go into here and click on this particular item, I'd be able to open this and see the contents of this. This is a separate permission. This is intentionally done so you don't see the actual information inside of the document if you're just a general SOC or compliance admin or a login and monitoring related admin. So just bear that in mind. There's two permissions for this, purely for your own safety. And then if we scroll down and have a look at the sensitivity labels I have here, we have documents that I've applied the Project Vulcan one to. We have documents and other items within here for regulatory items. And of course, my confidential internal one. And again, if I was to select this item, I can see the content inside of it. Then we have the retention labels, so we can see what the Content Explorer gives us from this perspective of where these are applied to. I have 6 regulatory records here as well. And here are those items, and then 1 records version in. Then we have Activity Explorer. So within Activity Explorer then, we get the ability to see who's doing what with what type of content. And then we can come down here and see the DRP rules that have been matched for a particular user, or if a label has been applied and how it's been applied. We get a nice graph here on the days and the months where you can go through and have a look at the types of criteria that and reporting that have been created that particular day. We also have at the top a number of filtering actions where we can have the activity based on what you have configured in your environment. So we have label applied, file read, DLP rule match, file modified, file created. Then we have the location. So if you have endpoint DLP enabled, you'll be able to see those in here as well. And you have the obvious workloads of Exchange, OneDrive, Microsoft Teams, and SharePoint. Then you can choose through any user you particularly want to have a quick look at. And then you have the sensitivity label. So if you want to have a quick look or a deeper dive into what type of label has been applied to what data, by whom, you can come in here and pick that out should you wish to do so. There's lots of rules that you can go through in here. As I said, you've got the opportunity to click on the file read, or to enable that, should I say. And then you have the labels applied and the locations. So let's take up Megan's, for example. We can clearly come in here and see that there was a label applied, and it was applied auto, and it was applied to this particular document, okay? That document lives within this area here, and this is the retention that was applied to it. The user was the auto labeling policy. The label event was none, and then it happened on this particular date. So this is where you would come to view that activity from your users, your locations, and the rules that you have created in your environment. And that's an overview of data classification. Next, let's take a look at information protection. So information protection gives you the ability to build out sensitivity labels, and those sensitivity labels are used to classify files and emails, or you can apply them to a container level like a SharePoint site or Microsoft Teams site or a 365 group. Within them, you get the ability to apply encryption with labels, and then specific permissions for specific recipients to consume and interact with that label. Additionally, you have the ability to apply auto labeling client side. So that's on the Windows 10 device if you have the unified labeling installed, unified labeling client installed, should I say. And then you have the service side labeling, which is essentially done from the service side to assess the data that's inside of SharePoint, OneDrive, and Exchange, but Exchange has to be in transit. So we'll take a look at those as we go out through here. So within my taxonomy then, this is just my labeling taxonomy, which I use for demos. And as you can see, I have a general label, and then I have confidential labels, which are for file and email. I have a confidential label, which is for groups and sites. The same goes for highly confidential and highly confidential groups and sites. And then I have a standalone secret. Now I'll go through why I've built them out this way specifically, but let's go and take a look at what's inside of the labels, how they're configured, and why they're configured the way they are. First and foremost, let's take a look at the general one. So as you build out your label, you'll see that you have just the basic configuration up front where you can use the name, display name, description for users, and then description for admins. Do note, once you've actually submitted this label from configuration perspective, the name can't be changed. However, you can change the display name, as you can see here. This one is grayed out and this one is available. So just bear that in mind. I do have some customers that have gone through and put test label in front and then called it general or public or personal, or whatever the case may be. And then they've started to basically slowly roll that label out, not realizing that you can't change this after the fact of committing. So just bear that in mind. Then on the next page, we get the scope. So where do you want this particular label to be applied to? In my example here, I just have it for files and emails. But should you want to build out that container level, then you would go for groups and sites. And additionally, now we have the ability of Azure Purview assets. So if you have some SQL columns or any files installed in Azure Blob Storage that you want to apply a sensitivity label to, so the users and the admins that are collaborating with that data or dealing with that data can understand that this data has a classification of highly confidential or confidential or whatever the case may be. It's entirely up to you, but that is now a possibility for you. But as I say, as this is just a general label, it will be files and emails that we're taking a look at today. Then, of course, I don't want to apply any encryption to this item because it is just a general item. So it's available for anybody internally and outside of the business. Therefore, I don't need to put a certain set of permissions or wrap encryption on it because it's going out of the environment or because it's confidential or highly confidential. Therefore, I want to limit who has the visibility to it. Again, I don't want to mark any items with a general marking at all. I just want to leave it as it is. But as I say, it purely depends on your classification taxonomy within your organization, what you want this to be built as. For my example here on general, I'm not going to use any auto labeling because I can't specify what type of sensitive information type or data I want to label. It's just going to be general data. Again, once you select files and emails from the scope section, you don't have anything to select within here. Only when you select the groups and sites for in the scope that you'll get something within this area here. And the same goes for Azure Purview as well. And then as we come through to the end of the configuration, you just have your review settings. So this is an overview of what you've imported into the label for you to use it within your environment. and then you would just select save. Now let's take a look at our next labels. So within here, then I have confidential labels, and this is my parent label. And within here, then you can see I have sub labels. Now this is built out in a way for you to wrap any particular confidential or highly confidential or any top label with sub labels. So when the user sees that in the built-in client or the unified labeling client which is installed, you can actually identify this is confidential, you select on it, and then you get the drop down box of these particular items in here. Our first one we're going to take a look at is internal. Okay, so let's take a look at that now. Now, again, you just get the default configuration up front. I would always try and put as much information in as you can for the description for the users and the admins. In my example here, I know what they are, so I don't have to put too much of a description in, but I would always tell customers, the more information that you put in here, the more easier it is for the end user to understand what this label is for. You can also add colors to labels as well, so you can have like a traffic light system where you can have green for general, amber for confidential, and then red for highly confidential. Then you can mark that out in here and say, you know, anything that's amber would be this type of document or this type of data. Anything that's red would be the same thing. The user can then look at the description, look at the illumination of the color, and then decide, okay, I have this type of information, therefore I'm going to apply this label. Again, we just have file and emails in here. I don't need to select anything else because I always keep them separate. Now, on this particular label, we're going to go with encrypt file and emails, and then we're also going to go mark with content because I want to be able to specify who has access to this label. Furthermore, I want this label to be encrypted because it is indeed confidential information. Additionally, I want to be able to mark the content with the relevant terminology from the classification taxonomy. Therefore, I've selected this one also. Then when I've come into encryption, I've selected configure encryption settings. Now, there is two options in here. You have assign permissions now, and then let users assign permissions when they apply the label. This one we'll take a look at in the recipient only configuration. Then we have user access to a content expires. This is ideal if you have quotes or any vendor information that you want to expire after a certain amount of days. You can pick a specific date, or you can pick 10, 30, 60, 90 days, whatever the case may be. Additionally, you have allow offline access. So if you want as an organization to allow access for only a certain number of days, like I have here, which is 5 days, once you've gained first initial access to that item, you have 5 days access of offline access to it. So after 5 days, on the 6th day of your offline access, you'll have to go back through the authentication to get access to this particular label. This is good in instances where businesses want to control the data and the access to the data if they have a lot of joiners, movers and leavers, like contractors and so on and so forth, or they just have a lot of turnaround of staff moving to different departments or different geographical locations where that particular label, or this particular label rather, would be used or non-used. Now, when we select configuration settings and apply permissions now, we get this blue hyperlink here. Within here, we can go and click, and then we have a bunch of options here. The first one would be add all of your users and groups in your organization. When you select this, it brings up your actual routing domain from an Azure perspective. A lot of customers will see this and think, oh, this is not my domain. My vanity domain is not here. But I'm told that this is like this by design. And it's due to the way that the authentication and the permissions and the labels and Azure and the routing is actually structured. So if you see on Microsoft.com address here, don't worry, that's supposed to be there. Then we have add any authenticated users. So this would be any user that has access to an Azure AD account or a federated social account or even an internet mail enabled account. Okay, it's like Gmail, Yahoo, Outlook.com and so on and so forth. This is where you can add those users in. And then you can add users or groups. Now, I don't see this being used that often. It would only be used in specific cases, like I have a secret label, which I'll show you in just a moment. That is actually mapped back to a group. It is that way because I have certain users as a fictitious example. I have all of my stakeholders and the CXO level people within that group, and only they can see that secret label. Additionally, I have add specific email addresses or domains. So if you have like a distribution list or whatever the case may be that's in there, you can add that in there for your own purpose. Additionally, you can add in third-party domains. So if there's a company or a sister company or an ombudsman or a regulator or even a law company that you have to share data with, and that data has to be encrypted in transit, you can use this particular option here to add in those domains. So you can add in company A or company B or lawcompany.com or whatever the case may be, and then apply the relevant permissions. So whatever you choose within here, you can apply the relevant permissions. Those permissions are co-owner, co-author, reviewer, viewer, and custom. It is entirely up to you how you want to configure these. You can actually have down here, as it shows you your permissions and your users and groups, and then your permissions here. You can have a multitude of users in here or domains in here if you like that have different permissions. So you can have one at co-owner, one at co-author, and then a reviewer and a viewer should you wish to do so. It's totally granular on how you can actually work this out. So let's take a look at the recipient only one. Again, basic configuration up front, and just a reminder, always put as much information in here as you can. Files and emails, encrypt and mark the content. So on this one then, when we've got configure encryption settings, we now see that I have the second option under the tab here to let users assign permissions when they apply the label. When this is configured, you'll get these two additional boxes here. Now, within Outlook, the two CC and BCC field, they are your recipients only configuration. So obviously within Outlook, you state who is going to consume, what the recipients are going to be that's going to consume this item. Within Word, once you select this box, when you go into Word and apply that label to that document, whether it be a Word, PowerPoint, or an Excel document, you get a pop-up box. That pop-up box will then give you the ability to add in those users. So those recipients who are going to receive it are the only ones that can consume that item. That is called recipient only. So you're basically inputting in the recipients to say, here is the recipients and here are the actual additional permissions or configurations that I want these recipients to have. That does include non-print and print capabilities. So do not forward, of course, is a general rule on pretty much all of the labels that I see companies building out. So you want that recipient to consume that item, but not to be able to forward that item on. It gives you the ability to reply all, of course, but it doesn't give you the ability to share it outside of the intended recipients from the first configuration step. This time, let's have a look through at the content marking. Now, when it comes to watermarks, I've only seen probably 1 or 2% of customers use a watermark. I'm sure there's other people out there that would say most of their customers use watermark, but in my scenario, I haven't seen many. The feedback that I get is that the watermark across the document makes it hard to read the item. So therefore, if you're struggling to read it, people won't want to use it. They may want to use it to add a watermark to a print, for example, so you can build out another label with exactly the same and then not choose the header or footer, but choose the watermark. Therefore, you can print that item off. Given the fact that that watermark is across the document, you're able to identify what type of document that is. And that's it. So we're coming through to auto labeling. So let's have a look at the auto labeling example that I have set up. Standard configuration again. Files and emails, encrypt and mark the content. So as you'll see in this side, I've already given it specific permissions to my fictitious Project Falcon group. So everybody in this group is part of that project group. I've still got my set number of days. I have my header and footer set. And now the important bit. So I've come through to the auto labeling here. So I've switched the toggle on for auto labeling. And when you do that, you get this box here. It looks very familiar to DLP. Now within here, I've selected add, and then I've selected a sensitive information type. This sensitive information type, if you remember back to when we were looking for data classification, is one of the custom sensitive information types that I've built out. And it simply looks for the words project and Falcon. That's it. Very simple, makes it very easy to demo, so customers can understand this straight away when I start using it. I've added this in here. So when I'm working within a document or I'm working within Outlook, and Outlook detects either of these words or these words independently, it will give me a pop-up at the top to say, hey, I see that you're using this sensitive information type, therefore I'm going to recommend this label. And this is the display message that I get. Now, there are two options within here, but Microsoft have a metaphor of crawl, walk, run. That crawl, walk, run scenario is actually manual labeling, then recommending labeling, then auto labeling. So the other option within here is automatically apply the label. Now, of course, I would test this out vigorously to make sure that the data that you're getting back from a recommended perspective is exactly what you're looking for. So if you had multiple financial services sensitive information types wrapped into here, then what would actually happen is it would start to look at that data and then give you recommendations based on that data. But if you have a numeric value in your environment that looks very much like a credit card number, and you've got this set to automatically apply, then you have the possibility for this to be auto applied to a document or an email that doesn't actually need that classification. So always be very cautious about using the automatically apply the label. This works well for actual employees and end users to understand what data they're actually dealing with as well. So I have customers that are using this for many different variations of sensitive information, whether it be PII data or financial services data, or even custom data to your organization. When you have this wrapped into a auto labeling policy, which is client side, then this will pop up with the message here to give you the indication of the type of data that you're dealing with. That then gives some sort of end user training, if you like, to say, hey, this is the information that we detected. Therefore, this is the label we're going to recommend for you to apply. Okay, let's go back into the labeling then. Now let's take a look at the confidential groups and sites labels. My highly confidential and highly confidential groups and sites are exactly the same as what I have here. So rather than go through them all, I'll just go through the ones that I have currently. So on a groups and sites label, then the same thing applies. I have a parent label and then sub-labels within it. Now, as you can see, each of these has a different permission applied to them. So my confidential one here has allow all external sharing. And then the second one has allow limited external sharing. Then the next one, allow with conditional access for external sharing. And then confidential, block all external sharing. So let's take a look at the top one where I'm allowing all sharing inside of this container level. Again, simple configuration up front. But this time we've got groups and sites set. So I want to be able to apply this sensitivity label to a Microsoft Teams, Microsoft 365 group, or a SharePoint site. And I would define that by selecting the groups and sites. Then, because you have groups and sites set on, and there's currently no encryption available for groups and sites, these are grayed out. Then we select next. Now we have some new configuration, okay? So at this point, we need to define the protection settings for Microsoft Teams, Microsoft 365 groups, and then the SharePoint sites themselves. And because this particular label, I'm allowing all access to all of these three containers. I'm selecting both of these. So the first one is privacy and external user access. So as it states, you control the level of access that internal and external users will have to labeled team sites. That should be capital T Microsoft, and then Microsoft 365 groups. External sharing and conditional access, again, gives you extended capabilities to control external sharing and configuring conditional access settings to protect labeled SharePoint sites. Once we select these, we then go through another subset of configurations. So we go through the first one that's defined. Now within here, within the privacy settings, we have three configurations, okay? We have public, so anyone in your organization can access the group or team, including content and members. Then we have private. So this again only goes for only team members and owners and members, can access the group or team, and only members can add members. And then we've got none. Okay, so team and group members can set the privacy settings themselves. So it's completely up to you. You can tell the user, go away and set it yourself if you wish to do so. And then we have the team side of it. Okay, so we have the external user access. So let Microsoft 365 group owners add people outside your organization to group as guests. So if you're controlling access via groups, this is where you would select that particular option. Then we would come through to define the external sharing. Okay, so this is around SharePoint. So the first option we've got is control external sharing from labeled sites. So what do we want from a content perspective? So are we going to allow anyone, as I've got selected here, because I want anybody to have access to this particular container level or label, if you like. Then I've got new and existing users, only existing users, and then only people in your organization. The second option I have is use Azure AD conditional access to protect labeled sites. Now, if anybody's used to looking at the back end of SharePoint when it comes to permissions, you will see that these are actually very familiar. It's the same thing applies, they're just now available within the label. So as I've got here, determine whether users can access SharePoint sites from unmanaged devices, I've got allow full access from desktop apps and mobile apps, okay? That's pretty much it when it comes to allowing all on a groups and sites or aka container level label. Let's take a look at the other ones that I've got configured. This time we're going to have a look at allow but with limited external sharing. Groups and sites selected because we're going to apply the sensitivity label to groups and sites, aka the container level. No ability to encrypt right now. Again, both of these options ticked, okay? But when we come through to the next slide, this now has private and I don't have the external user access for the 365 groups connected, okay? Then in the next page for around the SharePoint site, I now have this configured in a slightly different manner where I now have new and existing guests, which I'm going to allow them in. However, I'm only going to allow them web access. Now, this works exactly the same as the old SharePoint configuration settings would do, where you have the user come through and they just get the web version only. Now, this is ideal in some scenarios. I'm working with some large manufacturing companies, large car manufacturing companies, and they would share lots of designs and documentation, which is based in PDF. Now, they would actually display that from the web access only, so it prevents the user on the opposite side, who may be a third party or a vendor or a contractor, or whatever the case may be, to only have visibility of that document. So they can't download, they can't print, they can't sync the files locally to the machine. So this gives you additional protection, but also keeps your consistency and your collaboration going within your environment. Let's take a look at another label I have. This time I'm going to allow, but with the conditional access. So Microsoft have given you the ability the last few months to add an MFA, conditional access policy, or a policy that looks at the condition of your actual device. So let's take a look through that. Again, groups and sites configured. Not able to encrypt just yet. Both options selected because I want to make sure I'm covering all of the aspects when it comes to container level labeling. This time I've got private and external user access selected. But on this occasion, even though I have the same configuration under new and existing guests, I now have the ability to choose a conditional access policy of which I've created in my environment. So as it states, when you're using or you're dealing with unmanaged devices, I have a conditional access policy that is set up to allow you in, but you have to go through MFA, and your device has to meet a minimum requirement when it comes to the device compliance. So that would be your device is not jailbroken, or it has a certain level of antivirus on it. Again, allowing that defense in depth when it comes to the labels, and then when it comes to knowing who users are and trusting that user as well as their device. Now let's take a look at my last label. Again, both options selected because I want to protect both of these areas. But now I have set this to private. And then on the external user access, I don't have this selected at all. So I don't want to give them the opportunity to add people outside of the organization into a group. Furthermore, I've selected control external access, and then I've selected only people in your organization. Now, anybody connecting in from an unmanaged device will be blocked. It's as simple as that. This is the way container level labels work. To have a number of options that you can choose from to give access, to give limited access, to give access with a conditional access policy wrapped into the background of it, or to completely block anybody that you wish to do so. The last example I want to walk you through is something that I got through from a customer a couple of months ago, and they had the ability to apply. They wanted the ability to apply a secret label, and that label was only available to CXO level, board members, stakeholders, and so on and so forth. They were going through an acquisition. There was an acquisition and merger. I can't remember which one it was. And they was actually going through, and they wanted to keep all the documentation around that particular acquisition and merger secret. Therefore, they could actually do an investigation into the business and so on and so forth without letting anybody know. Now, they wanted to share that documentation internally and still have the ability for it to be safe, encrypted, and only the users that need to see it would be included into the policy and the labeling permissions themselves. So let's take a quick look inside of this one. On this one, I've got file and emails because I only want this to apply to items. Encrypt and mark the content. And now I have assigned permissions now. Now I've made a group inside of Microsoft 365 Admin Center for board members and stakeholders. I've called it that so I could demo it back to the customer for them to understand this is what I would suggest that they do. Now I've added co-owner onto this. The only reason why I've added co-owner is because they would be sharing this around, and there'd be a possibility for people to change this label and add other labels once that particular document or that stage within the acquisition and merger was relevant. Therefore, they wanted the full ownership rights on the label itself and the documents where the label is applied. To do that, again, you would come into assign permissions, and then you would go to add users and groups. I've selected this particular group here, added it in, and then applied the relevant permissions to it, of which you can see here. That's how you would build out a specific label for that. There is no other configuration in here that's relevant. It's not an auto labeling policy, labeling permission or anything like that. So let's take a look at the actual policies in the background for what I've got configured. Now, as you can see, I've got 3 different variations of policies in here. The last one speaks for itself. So as we were just talking around the actual secret label itself, I built out a specific policy for that. So anybody that's inside of here get access to that secret policy. And again, I've used the same group, which I'll show you now. So you come through the labeling policy, you click edit, and you add the labeling of which you want to be inside of the policy. Then you select the users and groups. And in our case here, I have the board members and stakeholders. So this is my fictitious group, which I've demoed back to that customer. I've added that in here. So therefore, only these people see that label, okay? And only those people have access to that label because I've given them specific permissions in the label. Then we have the settings, okay? Within all of the labels that I have, you have the ability to choose all of these options should you wish to do so. The most important one, and the one that I see very regular, is users must provide a justification to remove a label or lower its classification. Now, I must tell you, if you have sub-labels configured, to date, you do not get a downgrade justification because it's inside of the container where the parent label lives. Microsoft are working on that at the moment to have that ability there, so you can do that justification, downgrade justification with inside of that parent label. This is why I suggest to anybody that has a secret label, which is classed as internal and external, not to use them as sub-labels, to use them as parent labels. Therefore, you get that downgrade justification. Another one I see used frequently, but not all the time, is require users to apply a label to their emails and documents. That essentially is saying that and you open an email or you open a document, and before you save it or close it, you have to apply a label to it. Then you have require users to apply a label to the Power BI content. So if you have users working with Power BI content, you have the ability to then provide a label to them to say, okay, you must apply a label. Then we have provide users with a link to a custom help page. So this is predominantly used on all of the policies that I work with. And this gives you the ability as an organization to share that classification taxonomy with your users in some way, shape, or form. And that would just be a shortened version of your classification taxonomy. To say, if you're stuck, you don't understand what the labels are, or you don't understand the data that you're going to apply the label to, here's a link for a bit of a breakdown that you can go through to understand the concept of why we use a classification taxonomy, and perhaps the data that is applied to each of those classification taxonomy labels. Let's take a look at the file and emails one. In this one, then I've selected edit, and I've added in all of the labels that I've got marked from file and email. As you can see in here, all my groups and sites and my secret one are not within this one because they are built out in a different policy. Working our way through this one, then we have all users selected on this one because I want all of my users in my environment to have the ability to see these labels and apply these labels to the relevant documentation. Again, in settings here, I have users must provide a justification to remove a label or lower its classification. And the other three options there are not chosen purely down to my own demoing purposes, but again, work out what works best for you as an organization. Let's take a look at the last one, which is admins for groups and sites. Now, the reason why I have a separate policy for groups and sites, a container level labeling, is because if you have these inside of the file and email policy, users will have access to these labels, okay? So some of the companies that I work with don't want that. So they don't want a user that has access to a file and email label to have the same grouping within the same label for groups and sites. That then means that you as a user can go to that Teams channel or that SharePoint site or that 365 group and remove that label, okay? So we've specifically built out sensitivity labels for groups and sites, as you saw before within the labeling and as you see now within the actual policy itself. That then gives you the ability to apply this policy to the collaboration application admins, as I've got here. Again, another fictitious group, but within here would be my Azure AD admins, SharePoint admins, team admins. Therefore, they are the only users, that have the ability to apply that label to that container level. Therefore, no other user within that environment can remove it. You would have to be an admin. That gets around the fact that the user has access to the permissions within the label or the policy, therefore removing that. So that segments that capability. And that's why I have that built out specifically as it is here today. Next, we're going to take a look at auto labeling service side. Auto labeling service side has two main areas really. You have the simulation mode, which gives you the ability to do the data discovery inside of your environment. So within Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive, you can add in sensitive information types, and you can search for those sensitive information types within those three workloads. SharePoint and OneDrive are data at rest, but Exchange is actually data in transit. The other option is to automatically apply sensitivity labels to those specific workloads. So let's take a look at the auto labeling policy I have set up here in simulation mode. So as you can see from my auto labeling policy here, I've got this classified as data discovery, okay? And then I have the financial services scan on side of this. So within this particular label here, here's the details that I've got configured with this label. So I have the ability to add in these sensitive information types here. And then I've applied it to these three locations here and selected all for all of the OneDrive accounts, all of the SharePoint sites, and all of the mailboxes. Therefore, When any of these items are found, this will come back into the matching items here. So you can see under your total matching items files per policy rule, and I'll go through the per policy rule in just a moment. We can see that it has 56 items that are mapped into OneDrive and then 16 items that are mapped into SharePoint. So let's take a look at the rule, the policy itself. Now within here again, the naming convention applies. Once it's submitted, you can't change it. And then the location that I have here is predominantly for my demo purposes. I've added this in here so I can show customers that this is how it works. And then again in here I have the locations of where auto labeling is currently supported. Again, we've got Exchange, SharePoint, Sites, and OneDrive. Exchange is in transit, so it's only the emails that are sent. And then we've got the rule itself. So again, very much looking like DLP. We can go into this rule here. And as I've got in my conditions here, I've added in at the bottom my sensitive information types, which I want this policy to go and find. So it will then go through your environment and find everything that is mapped into here and give you that report back. This helps you as an organization to understand the data that you have in 365 under those workloads. You're able to have that graphical view of what you have and where it is located. Some of my customers are actually using this to their advantage to then go out and build a retention schedule or even a classification taxonomy to understand the types of data that they have. On the flip side of that, I have customers that are using this to build out the retention schedule or retention matrix, whatever you want to call it, to build out those time-based retention periods and understand what types of data they have and where. Consequently, if they have them in a lot of financial services information in a particular SharePoint site, then they can apply retention to the site rather than the items independently. It also helps you, well, it's also helping some of my customers to build out their SharePoint design a little bit more in tune to what Microsoft is giving you from a sensitivity label perspective. So you can apply highly classified financial data as a label and apply that to the site. And then use the auto labeling policy here to go and discover that data, find that data, and then migrate data into that particular site itself. So let's take a look at the next options that we have here. So we have the same now for SharePoint. So as you can see on the left-hand side here, you can have specific rules for specific workload locations. But primarily for my demo purposes, I have the same information in each of these particular workloads. Again, for OneDrive, you can see I have the very same configuration. And then we get through to the label side. So this is where you would choose that label should you wish to automatically apply that label to the contents of what the auto labeling policy finds. Now, you don't have to do that straight away, and I'll show you in a moment that you don't have the ability to do that on your very first simulation or your very first scan. I will always advise my customers to go through the data, see what it's found, see what it's matched, and then run multiple simulation modes or run multiple scans to understand that data on a wider aspect. So within here, you would just click on change or you click on add, and then you would be giving all of your labels in your environment. Therefore, you can select the relevant label to the data that you're looking for. If it's confidential, you would select one of the confidential ones. If it's highly confidential, you'll select one of the highly confidential ones. And again, the same for secret, should you wish to do so. Let's take a look at the next options then. So within the policy mode itself, then you have initially only two options. You have run policy mode in run policy in simulation mode, or leave the policy turned off. So as it states, Microsoft have intentionally not given you the ability to just switch the policy on and therefore just go out and grab all sorts of data. Sometimes, consequently, that data doesn't match what you have in your sensitive information type. It can just be a very close alphanumeric value or a numeric value or an alphabetical value that it finds, but it's not actually the item you want to match. Therefore, running this in simulation mode gives you the ability to identify that data before you start to auto-label that data. And that's pretty much it. And then you come through to the finish. But let's have a look at the actual policy and the results that it's come back. Once we're inside the simulation overview, you'll get to see what items have actually been matched and the variations of the sensitive information types that you've added in. So if you come down to the files ready to view here, you have a number of options from a coloring and a graphical perspective to have a look at the items that this particular auto labeling policy has found, and because I've had these sensitive information type mapped into here, you'll have the ability to select these and take a look through them. Now this auto labeling works with custom sensitive information types as well. So if you want to map those in and look for certain specific organizational types of data, you can also do that. Then we have on this side, no matching email. So your email ones per policy is separate to your OneDrive and SharePoint. Because I've not sent any emails to trigger this particular rule off, that's why it's showing a 0 value at this time. Then we have turn policy on, which of course I would only recommend you do once you're absolutely sure that the data that comes back is matching. And then you've got review matching items or items to review here. Additionally, at the top, you've got the ability to restart that simulation. So if you looked at the data and you figured out that there are, let's say, 2, 4, maybe 10, 12 items in there that are not relevant, in my example here, I can go in and then match them or mark them as a match, whatever the case may be, and then go through and restart that simulation for it to go back and have another look at the data that I'm trying to find. So within the items to review, then you can come in here and you can take a look at the items that you found. Now you'll see the sensitive information types here that has been found. You can select this and it will bring it up on the right hand side, the amount of information that it's found in a particular document or a single entity. Then you can see what the actual high confidence, medium confidence or low confidence is with the sensitive information types that you've found. Therefore, it's giving you the ability to actually work through that data to understand whether or not that data is in fact a credit card number or an EU debit card number or a US bank account number, whatever the case may be. You can go through each of your items, and what is displayed here is just a subset, just an example of all the data that's found in the past. So if you have a lot of items that's come up here, you'll be able to go through and have a look at a very simple sample of data that it's actually found. I have customers that here have hundreds of thousands of items, and that will just show you a very small sample of that data itself, therefore giving you the ability to sift through it and make sure it's actually accurate. So that's auto labeling the service side. Next, we're going to take a look at information governance. So information governance then. Information governance gives you the ability to apply time-based retention periods to items or workloads within your environment for regulatory purposes or for archival purposes. It purely depends on your business need, what you want to use information governance for. We have retention labels where they can be configured and applied to certain apps in your environment, like Outlook. So if you have, for example, a employee termination label or even an employee record that comes through, you have the ability to apply that label to that specific item. That then gives you the ability to either retain that item for a certain period of time or just delete that item, depending on what you want that to do, of course. Then we have retention policies. Retention policies are what you apply to the workload itself. So everything within that particular workload, wherever you apply it, will have that same retention-based period, whereas labels will allow you to apply that to that item, remember. So we have within here, we have a number of options that we can choose from. As you can see, I've got many different examples in here. Teams chat, based on sensitivity, inactive mailbox users for VIP users, inactive users for just a general standard of policy, and then we have employee records again. Then we have import. So I see import being used quite a lot by organizations who have lots and lots of PST data that's on premise from previous archival runs, or even from a compliance archive perspective, where they bundled everything up into a on-premise compliance archiving solution or archiving solution and chosen not to move those to Office 365 or Microsoft 365. Due to the vast amount of data that they have there, they'll keep it on premise. Now, if you're running an investigation or you have some data from a particular user that has a genuine interest in sensitivity or deals with sensitive information, then you have the ability to grab that PSD data and import it into 365 and have it collectively in one place, so you can do e-discovery searches on it and so on and so forth, should you wish to do so. So this gives you the opportunity to do that. Again, you have another opportunity where you can ship some hard drives to Microsoft. So if you feel you have terabytes and terabytes of data and you just don't want to use the import job here to basically migrate or push it all up into 365, you have that option to send that disk over to Microsoft, and Microsoft will happily import that in for you. And then we have the archive function. So as you would always see in Exchange Online or even on-premise Exchange, you have the ability to provide the user with a archive mailbox. Microsoft is now giving you the opportunity to do this from the information governance section in Microsoft 365 compliance. It just makes it easier while you're in here, because of course that is a governance action where you want to archive that data off. You can simply come in here and just select a user and just enable that user for archive, or disable that user for archive. I would always recommend to enable archiving wherever you can. Giving the user that maximum performance in their primary mailbox gives you the ability to have that ease of accessing emails on a regular basis. And anything from an archival perspective, of course, would go into this particular archive mailbox. So let's take a look at how labels and retention policies are configured. You can see I've not touched on adaptive scope policy just yet. We'll take a look at those when we come to records management though. So first of all, let's take a look at a couple of examples that I've got here. So I have employee records. So what that means is that I want to be able to tag any particular document as an employee record, and therefore I want to keep it forever. Okay. In similar cases, you would want to keep it for a specific time. So as you can see here, you have your retention duration down here. Let's bring that a bit closer. And then we have employee termination, and then medical roles termination, and then you have your years to keep. So let's take a look at this financial services summit one I created for an event a few weeks ago. Again, the general configuration when it comes up with your naming and your descriptions. And then we have in the background, we have the ability to apply what time-based retention period we would like. Now this comes with some default ones of 5, 7, and 10. These are the most frequent amount of time-based periods that we see, and these are usually mapped into some type of regulation. But if you want to be able to, if you have the need to create a custom one, you can just select custom and then choose from the arrows here the number of years, months, or days that you need to keep it for. Okay, and then we have start the retention period based on. So in this option here, and I'll show you how to create one in just a moment, we have two options. We have when items were created, and then when items were modified. Of course, the difference between the two is as soon as you apply that policy to that workload location, or you apply it to that particular item and you create it, you've only just created that item, it will be kept from that day. But if you were to interact with that item on a regular basis and you needed to keep that item from the last modified date, that's where you would come in here and apply it to the last modified date. Therefore, you've got that rolling time-based period for that rolling versioning document. Then we've got at the end of the retention period. So you have a number of options here that you can choose through. And again, it would all depend on your retention schedule or your retention matrix that you've developed internally within your business. But we have delete items automatically. We have trigger for a disposition review, so I'll touch on that when we go through records management. We have do nothing, so leave the items in place. You just won't be able to do anything with them. You have to manually delete them yourself. Retain items forever. Only delete items when they reach a certain age, or don't retain or delete items. Okay, so if you label it, nothing will happen to it. All right, let's take a look at how you would create one. So to create a label, then you just need to come up to create a label. You need to apply a name to it. So let's try legal contracts. I'll just simply copy and paste this in here, but of course, like I always say, put as much information in here as you possibly can. And on this occasion, we're gonna click a custom one, okay? And we're gonna select this for 12 years, okay? Just to show you how easy it is to do that. And then we'll go through when items were last modified. You see a lot more options in here, but I'll go through those just in a minute. and then you've got when items were last modified. And then we want to trigger for disposition. Okay, so when that time-based period expires, the item within that time-based period then will go through to a disposition review. And a disposition review will allow you, as an organization, which is an E5 feature, to go through each of those items that are pending deletion before you commit them for deletion. So that gives you that defensible disposal in depth. So you can have up to 5 disposition reviewers. I would always advise, if the data is sensitive or is important to you or your third parties or your employees, then always go through a disposition review, because once that data is committed for deletion and it's deleted, you're not going to get it back. So we'll select trigger for disposition review in this case, so we can see what the options are on the next page. And then you have add disposition reviewers, okay? And as it states here, you can have 1 to 5 stages of reviews, okay? Now, it's entirely up to you how you do this. It's completely down to your retention schedule or your compliance or your regulator or whatever the case may be. But I'll just show you simply how to create those stages. You would just simply click add stage. You can name it stage 1, or you can put it down to user review or data owner review or CISO review or whatever the case may be. You select then you select the user's name. And then you add another one in here. Okay, and then you just keep going until you get to the maximum of 5. You would select next and then create label. Then Microsoft have given you the option to actually publish that label straight away. Instead of having to create the label and then go back into the portal and then go through to the publish the policy, you now have the option to do this yourself. And as you can see, you have a couple of options here. You have auto apply this label to a specific type of content. Now, I've already got one of these created, so I'll show you that in just a moment. But for now, I'll just show you how to publish this label straight from the label configuration itself. So you would select next steps, publish this label to Microsoft 365 locations. It gives you the label of which you've just created to double check. So I would always double check, or you can add additional labels in here if you want to. Then we've got adaptive scopes and static scopes. We don't need an adaptive scope for this, so we're just going to choose static scopes. Then I'm going to choose my own specific locations just to show you what you can do and what workloads are supported. So you've got all the 4 main workloads here. You've got Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft 365 groups. For me, I don't want the 365 groups, just as an example. And then I'm going to select next. Sorry, I must say, you're going to make this available for all recipients, all sites, and all accounts. All right. Then you come in here and you type in whatever you want to call it. And then you come through to your review settings. Always review what you've got. Make sure that it is exactly as you need it, because once you submit it and it's pushed to service side, you won't be able to change some of the settings that are inside of it. So always double check. If you do need to change something that's grayed out, you'll have to delete the policy which you've got and then recreate another one. Now, I'm going to tell you at this stage, okay, it can actually take up to 5 days for a retention period to actually be published and made available in the applications themselves. Once you apply that label to the item as well, it takes a few days as well for that to go through. Now, Microsoft say retention is based on a number of years. So the engine and the priority to push this data down is not a top priority, of course, because if you want to keep something for 7 years, you're not going to be too bothered whether or not you get that within an hour or 24 hours. So just bear that in mind. If you don't see it straight away, or you don't see items in the deleted items or disposition reviews straight away. And that's it. You would just select submit at this time. And that's it. It's really as simple as that. It's too simple, really, because I'm just creating a label for you here, but based on what you want from an organization perspective, whether it be a regulatory requirement or whether it just be an internal requirement, always make sure that you've got that retention schedule, that retention matrix built out to what you need, where you need it, who needs it, and how long it needs to be kept, and what happens once that time-based period expires. Do you need the items to be deleted straight away? Do they need to go into a disposition review? Or do you just simply want alerting to the fact that that data is expired? Okay, let's take a look at retention policy and applying that to specific workloads. So as I stated in the intro, retention policies are what you can configure to apply to the actual workloads themselves of where the data is situated. So if we take, for example, my Teams chat data, so delete after 1 year. Let's take a look at this one. So again, standard configuration up front. This one is a static one. I don't need it to be an adaptive scope policy. And then I have the 2 Teams locations in here, okay? And this is actually for everybody in the environment. And again, we come through to the actual configuration itself on the actual back end of the retention policy, and we select only delete items when they reach a certain age. Again, you can choose whatever you want from in here. You can choose the standard 5, 7, 10, or even the customized one. And then you've got when items were created. So what this will do, it will go through all of my Teams chat throughout my environment on my organization. And it will start to pick out any items that are more than 12 months old or a year old, and then start to delete them automatically. That saves you having thousands and thousands of messages throughout your environment, just taking up lots and lots of data in the user's storage. Then once you've selected the configurations that you want and the time-based period that you want, that's it. You just click next, come right through to submit, and that will actually create that policy for you. But let's take a look at creating one anyway. So to create a retention policy, we just come up to new retention policy. We're down in the name of which we want to create. Let's create another test one. And then we select next. Again, we're going to click a static scope. But this time I'm only going to apply this to certain locations. So I'm only going to apply this to SharePoint and OneDrive, because what I'm going to do in the background is I'm going to make sure that any items in the users that I would choose for this, and I would apply this to specific users, by the way, not in a workload and whole, because if you apply it to all sites and all accounts, everything in that site and all of those accounts are actually going to have that data kept for that time-based period. So I would come in here and I would select specific sites. So I'm just going to add in one of my sites in here, just as an example. And I'm going to do the same for my admin OneDrive account as well. So I'm just going to edit that and add that particular user in there. So once I've done that, I know that those 2 locations will actually get this time-based retention period or this retention policy throughout. Will actually apply to the whole location of what they're applied to. And then we select next. I'm just going to go for the standard 7 years this time. I'm going to go delete items automatically, just so we can see what happens. And we come through, and that is it. That is as simple as that. That's how you create a retention policy within itself. But do note the warning at the end here. So any items that you have inside of the location, once the actual policy has been configured and the engine has run and identified those items that are over the 7 years, they will go through that purging of deletion. So just be cautious. Always make sure that you've got the relevant configuration for the relevant area of where the data is actually situated. And then you would just select submit. And that's it. It's just as simple as that. So next up, let's take a look at records management. So under records management, we have firstly an overview, and the overview gives you the pending dispositions and any particular items or the item count that are actually under disposition at this moment in time. So any disposition reviews that you've added on, the data that's sat inside of them, you'll be able to have a quick view of that here. You can always just select the view all pending dispositions. Other than that, you have the label application activities. So where are my most applied applications, or how they're automatically applied, or how are they applied, and so on and so forth. You get that view here. And of course, you can click manage your file plan, which I'll just go to now and show you this. File plan then gives you a complete overview of the governance that you have in your environment. So any labeling policies or retention policies that you created, well, regardless of the configuration, if they're an event or if they're auto applied, whatever the case may be, you'll get visibility of them within FilePlan. Additionally, from FilePlan, you get the ability to import a retention schedule or retention matrix. All you would have to do is download the actual template Microsoft have created for you and then import your data. When you do that, and then when you input the data into the actual file itself and then import it, you get the ability then to have that built out for you in the background. So it's really good if you have a very complex or a large retention schedule or retention matrix to use that. Take advantage of that, download it, input the data into the spreadsheet, and then upload it or import it into the file plan itself. That'll save you a massive amount of time. Now, when you come into file plan and create a label, you actually get additional configurations than what you would do in information governance. Records management is therefore more built out for your regulated environment. So your financial services, your insurance, your legal sectors, and so on and so forth. You can actually come in here and build out regulatory records. And what regulatory records will do is provide immutability on the item itself. So as I've stated here, this is a regulatory label. So under Sec 17A, for example, if I was to apply this label to an item, that therefore means that that item cannot be changed from the moment you apply that retention period or the regulatory label itself. Additionally, you have internal records versioning. And what that gives you is the ability to apply that as a record to anybody dealing with that item or that data set, whether it be a document of Word or whatever the case may be, knows that that item then falls under a certain regulation, whether it be internal or external. The user can then lock and unlock the item. So it does allow you to interact and upversion the item itself. As soon as you unlock it, go into the document and make a change to it, it's automatically updated to another version. Then all you would have to do as a user is go back and lock that particular item. The regulatory record at the top, which is immutable, does not do that. It basically just locks the item down. You cannot change anything inside of the item at that point. And I'll show you how to create those in just a moment. Then you have the label policies. Again, you see everything that you would have done under the information governance section. From here, you would see those normal items plus the regulatory items that I can see here. Then we have adaptive scope policies. Adaptive scope policies are new from Microsoft. As you can see here, they're in public preview. That means that you actually do get support from Microsoft on them if anything was to go wrong. I have a number of customers taking the leap onto adaptive scope policies due to the actual limitations currently with information governance, where you can have so many policies for so many assigned data sets or mailboxes and so on and so forth. Personally, I see this as a huge step forward for Microsoft when it comes to information governance and records management. I think it's an actual game changer and allows you to use adaptive scopes to apply to attributes and then configure your sites, groups, and users within the environment. And I'll go through them in just a minute. And then you have the policy lookup. So if you have complex adaptive scope policies or you have many of them in your environment, you can actually use the search banner here to look for specific users or specific groups or site configuration, whatever the case may be. This gives you a better option to actually go through and search for that data or search for those policies themselves. Then we have events-based policies. Now, events-based policies are based on a particular event type. So as you can see, I have employee termination and Project Falcon. So they will have specific configurations in the background to trigger that event. And once that event is triggered, the time-based period retention that you have applied to that will actually be pushed down onto the item itself. But we'll be taking a look through these anyway. Then we have disposition, and as I stated under information governance, this is an E5 feature, by the way. You can actually come through to disposition, and then you can select any of the items that you've got configured with disposition, and therefore have a look at how many items are actually up for deletion, if you like, or within the disposition reviews themselves. So let's take a look through the configurations then what we have here. So under file plan then, let's take a look at the ones I already have configured, and then I'll go through a sample one, of course. So first and foremost, let's go through the most important one, which is the regulatory record label. So again, standard configuration up front. Then we have the file plan descriptor. I would always tell my customers to make use of this. The more information that you have in here, the easier it is to identify what this particular configuration does, where it applies to, and why. So we can now see we have a particular reference ID in here, and that could be anything from your retention schedule matrix or mapping back to a regulatory requirement or an internal requirement, if you like. And then we have what the business function is. This is illegal, but you can choose from a number of options within here. You can also add your own in. Again, we have a subcategory. I have compliance in here, so we have a number of options in here as well that we can choose from. And then we have subcategories. So you may have a subcategory with under a specific category or department within your environment, within your organization, to apply certain regulations to, or time-based periods to certain configurations or data sets, if you like. And then we have authority type, which is a regulatory, and we have a couple more in here as well, which is business and legal. And then you have a provision and citation. Again, you can choose out which ones you want to go through, and you can add in your own as well. This one could be Sec 17, for example. It's entirely up to you. And then we have the defined retention settings. So here again is where we would mark out how long we need to keep that item for. And then we have the stat retention period based on, so based on item creation or item modification. And then as you can see in here, we have a couple of more items than we did under information governance, which is mark items as a record and mark items as a regulatory record. Now, the mark items as a regulatory record, if you haven't enabled it, it won't show up here. This is not available for you out of the box. Microsoft have done that to protect you from mistakenly applying this to an item, because once it's applied, you cannot remove it. It is there forever. So if you make a mistake, or you're just trying to work out what information governance from records management gives you, and you apply this to test it out, we're not going to be able to undo this for you. That is there, and it will basically stick there, and that's it. Furthermore, this comes with an additional option, which is preservation lock, and you need that turned on as well. And again, that is not available from the portal. You will have to do that from PowerShell, as you would creating the regulatory record itself. Then we have mark item as a record, and as I mentioned previously, that is the one that gives you the ability to upversion the document and lock and unlock the document. Then we have the standard configurations as we saw before. We have a trigger for disposition review, should I say, on this particular item. So let's take a look at those next options. Again, very similar to what we saw before. Exactly the same, to be perfectly honest with you. And in here I have a couple of more examples that I will show to customers. So we have the data owner, so that's a user level. Then we have the data owner, that's a department level, and then we have an organizational level, which is a compliance, legal, and risk team. So each one of these users would have to accept that data for committal for deletion, therefore again giving you that defensible disposal program. And then we select next, and it takes us right through to the end. And we would just basically submit or edit that label if you're making any changes to it. Now let's take a look at the other one, which is the records one, which is very similar, but it's just chosen a different option. Here we go. Same as, and in this side of the configuration, I haven't chosen mark items as a regulatory item. I've chosen mark items as a record. And both of these will come with their own separate warning, or own separate description, if you like. So always be sure that is the type of label that you want to apply to that data set before you go and apply it, and understand the consequences of doing that. Okay, then through to next. Again, very similar. I have no disposition on this one. I've just basically said just to get rid of the items, if you like. Retain items forever, I beg your pardon. And then straight through to the end. Now let's take a look at some of the more complex ones. So let's take a look at the employee termination label. So when I create this, I come through to the options themselves. I have no file plan descriptors in here, just for demo purposes. Now, as you can see, when I've got on this one, I have start a retention period based on expiration or termination of contracts and agreements. You can actually create an event type within the retention label itself if you wish to do so, and go through and create that and map that onto that particular event-based retention if you like. And what this will do, which I'll show you in a minute, it will go through the settings. I have a disposition review on this one, but let me just throw you through this one. And that's it when you come to create the actual label itself. You choose the year, you choose the actual time, the actual retention period based up on, then you choose retain items even if the users delete. Okay, so that means that these items will be kept regardless. All right, let's take a look at how you create one of these then. Okay, jumping over into events then. I have two already pre-configured here that I demo quite a lot, and just to show you the first one then. So this is based on a specific predefined event. So what will kick this retention period off is this subject here. So if a user emails in termination, purely an example, by the way, what will happen is the retention period will apply to the item because it matches this subject here. Additionally, you can apply what we call asset tabs to SharePoint and OneDrive sites. So if a user's site is then given this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 5 rather, beg your pardon, what will happen is it will automatically know to keep that data as well. So that simple email subject message kicks off that retention based period. I have another one here which is based around Project Falcon and contract events. So let's take a look at this one. And this one is for the subject of Project Falcon contract, or subject of Falcon contract, or subject of Project F contract. So again, what will happen is once this subject is identified within the actual retention, and this asset tag is applied to the SharePoint sites of where the data lives, this retention will automatically kick off. It's as simple as that. I see this being adopted quite a lot from an employee or a project standpoint. Additionally, for more options as well, and more configurations if you like. I think it's a very, very good option for Microsoft to have those event-based retentions done for you. Therefore, you're not relying on the user or an admin or a project admin or whatever the case may be to then, after the fact of somebody leaving or after the fact of a project going live or a project being rescinded, you're not having to go then apply that retention yourself. It's automatically done through the event-based retention. Within events, you can configure your own event types. So what would you like for that event to be? How would you want to trigger that event off? What category or subject would you like to wrap that around into? And you can come in here and create your own. You can add in any name or whatever the item may be. And this will simply just create an event type for you. So you can just say, I want the event type to be XYZ. And then you can then map that actual configuration of retention back onto the event type in itself. So let's have a look at how you create one of those. So again, within the configuration here, we just select whatever naming convention that you want to use, add the description of what you want to use. But more importantly, let's come to the event settings then. So within here, you have use event type. So as we said before, you have the ability to create and manage event types within your environment. Should you wish to map this particular policy onto an event type, then we would select use event type and then select the event type of which you want to use. That then will take you through to the configurations in here to mark out the items to look for within Exchange, and then where the asset ID is mapped back to. So it's clever enough to know that you've got this asset ID mapped back to a specific SharePoint site or OneDrive site, and therefore when it kicks off the retention for Exchange, it will also do the same for OneDrive. And then if we go back and choose an existing label, so if you remember prior to coming into the events, we had a couple of labels that were created in the created type of event-based. We can then come into here and select one of these two options here. Let's select the employee termination. And again, it takes you back through to the same page. And in here, again, you can add in the relevant information of how and why you want that event-based retention to kick off. You can have it to kick off on a specific date and so on and so forth. So take a good look at these. If you have a lot of information in your environment that would require or would benefit from event-based retention, this is a great asset to have. Now let's take a quick look at adaptive scope policies. Adaptive scope policies then, this is where you can use attributes within your environment to map back retention. And what that means is if you have a specific attribute like a country, and that country has an attribute mapped back to it, you can actually create that into a scope now and have that policy stay within that time-based retention period. But if a user was to move in and out of it, that user would either get it or then be removed from it. Let's take a look at these. So I have a couple of examples here. I have an inactive mailbox one. Let's take a look at this one because this is one of the key ones that I see being adopted quite quickly. So within here, you can see that I have inactive mailbox, and then the custom attribute I have is 15. But let's take a look at the scope details. So again, as you come into here, you can create your name and the description that you want to apply. But more importantly, within here now, with an adaptive policy, here is the three options that you get. So you get users, you'll select an Azure AD attribute used to define users, such as first name, last name, or department, or country, or whatever the case may be. And then you've got SharePoint sites, which is exactly the same, but that uses site name, site URL, or a redefinable string. And then you have Microsoft 365 groups. And again, uses a very similar thing, which is the name, description, and email address. Whatever you want to choose, you just choose within here, depending on the requirements of what you have. Then we select next. And this is where you would build out that custom query, okay, or that custom attribute for you to apply whatever time-based retention period to that attribute within itself. And in mine here, I have custom attribute, which is equal to leaver. So as soon as you have a joiners, movers, leavers process that maps into custom attribute and you wish to write leaver on that user, they would automatically get that configuration themselves. This also goes through for a number of options within here. As it states here, first name, last name, display name. Country and region is one of the ones that I see being frequently created because there are different regulatory requirements in different countries or different data sovereignty laws in different countries and continents, whatever the case may be. And then you can actually map that back to this particular attribute here. So you can have somebody within Germany using this and they will get the German retention period, or somebody within Switzerland or in Japan to get that particular region and that particular region's retention period, depending on what industry you're working in, of course. This is a fantastic option from Microsoft to work with now, because you can actually just, whatever the attribute is and whatever user is added into that attribute or into the group of where the attribute is applied to, they will get that time-based retention period. So it's essentially following it around in an automated fashion in the background. I have another one built out here for job title starts with executive. So if you have executives inside of your environment and the retention or the organization states that the data has to be kept indefinitely, then you can come in here and anybody that has executive marked next to the name, you can then build out the relevant policy with the time-based period in the background to keep that indefinitely. So let's take a look at how you would actually wrap these adaptive scope configurations into policies. So you'd come over to retention policies. You select new retention policy, give it a name. Let's do the inactive mailbox one. And then this time you would select adaptive scope, because we want to have that adaptability when it comes to the actual configuration itself. Then we would select next. Then we would click add scopes. Then we would see the configured adaptive scopes that we've created or you created as an organization. And then you would come and select the inactive mailbox ones. Now you will see here the locations of where this would be applied to when you create a user one or a SharePoint one or a groups one. You'll have the relevant configurations under the locations already predefined for you. In our case, because this is inactive mailboxes, I'm going to apply this only to Exchange. Then we would select next. We would select the years or amount of time that we need to keep this for. Okay, I'm just going to keep it for 7 years. Delete items automatically, and then I'll select next and submit. It's as simple as that. And then we have it. That's adaptive scope policies. Very easy to set up, but such a benefit to your environment to have that adaptability when it comes to those scopes and policies. Just anybody user having that attribute or being added into a group or a particular SharePoint site, any data that's going into there, it's just so much more easier for you to have that configuration done and not have to worry about it, knowing that that adaptability is there in the background. And that's it for information governance and records management. Now let's take a look at insider risk management and communications compliance. Insider risk management is an excellent solution from Microsoft, and it provides your organization the ability to build up a risk score on potential critical insider risks as they happen. Furthermore, providing a robust alerting dashboard to prevent incidents from happening before malicious activity has occurred. IRM uses real-time signal-based detection solutions, for example, DLP alerts, so you can create DLP policies for specific sensitive information types or specific sensitivity labels, and then map them into insider risk management policies themselves. You can use HR events, so you can plug an HR connector into insider risk management, which will give you predefined configurations to say, if an employee is leaving on X date, then keep an eye out, essentially. Or if you want to have the ability to map out employees that are leaving the environment, or theft by departing users is the template to use, then you can also keep a close eye on those as well. That is one of the main solutions, or main options within the solution that I see used frequently. People will plug in their HR data and then keep track of any like freelance contractors or anybody that's leaving or anybody that's been reprimanded from a business perspective. You have the ability to keep a close eye on them and raise their score if they were to go and do specific activities in the environment, like download a lot of data from SharePoint. So as soon as you open Insider Risk Management, you're greeted with the overview page. And this overview page gives you all of the information from an overview perspective. So here we can see we have all recommended actions within here. And then you have alerts to date. So who's doing what within your environment when it comes to Insider Risk Management and what policies are they mapped into. You have the top users in your environment that have particular cases against them or any activity against them. You have active cases, which I'll show you through in just a moment, and then policies with the most activities. So building out those policies, you can quickly come in here and see what is the most frequent alert that you want to see, or the most frequent user that's exfiltrating data, or if you like, or has the most alerts open for them. Additionally, you have some other options and configurations down here. You have Insider Risk Analytics. So if you were to select this, it would take you through to this view here, and then you could have a deeper dive into what's happening within your environment. And if you spot anything that you think is a data exfiltration or you think is a potential risk, you can then click on View Details and create a policy for that, or you can go to the main screen and create a policy yourself. Additionally, you can come through here and investigate user activity. So you can come in here and manage reports based on what the user activity is. Let's take a look at the actual global settings for Insider Risk Management then. So first and foremost, when you're setting Insider Risk Management up, if you come into the global settings and then you come through these configurations here, the first one you're greeted with is the privacy one. This will actually allow you to anonymize usernames, so it'll provide them a pseudonym, as you can see here. Microsoft have given you this configuration so you can prevent a conflict of interest. So if you have a friend or a partner or a family member that you work with who works in the security side of things or work in a different department than you, and you see that this particular user has exfiltrated data, or they've been using profanity or bullying in any way, or they've downloaded a load of data because they're about to leave, or they've been dismissed from the business, you can come in here and select show anonymized versions of usernames. Therefore, that user who that admin is unable to identify that user, and therefore could be anybody at that point given the pseudonym that they're given. So this is a great way to protect from that particular type of conflict of interest. Then you have the policy indicators. Now you must come in here in the global settings and turn these on before you can enable them in the policies. So make sure you head over here and select all should you want to use them all. You've got the standard Office 365 indicators here. Then you've got the actual device indicators, so anything that works from a device perspective on the Windows 10. Then you've got the security policy violations. I don't have a Microsoft Defender for ATP, but you can map these in here when it comes to defense evasion and unwanted software. You also have the physical access indicators. Now, I do see some customers using this, and what this will allow you to do is map in your card access system into IRM, and therefore state that if somebody has been dismissed immediately, to block their access to certain buildings or floors or data centers or whatever the case may be, you can now do that from within inside of risk management. So as I say, user gets dismissed, they update that in HR, they get locked out of particular data centers and so on and so forth. Very, very good introduction from Microsoft there. And then you have Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps indicators, so previously cloud app security, and then you can enable these as well. And then you've got risk score boosters. So as it states, your risk score for policy alerts that might be increased for these circumstances. So if you have some anomalies around the policies that you've got, you can then take a deeper dive into them and risk that score should you think that that's a potential exfiltration or a potential somebody potentially trying to get data out or exfiltrate data in whatever way possible. Then we've got the policy timeframes. So you can, once you've created a policy, you've got the activation window here. So how long will policies be active for? And you have 30 days. Then you've got past activities. You can go back 90 days. So if anybody in the environment is detected, or IRM, the signals within IRM detect that user activity, it will actually go back the last 90 days, even before the policy was created, which I think is an amazing option from Microsoft. Then we have intelligent detections. So you can come in here and build out additional configurations, whether it be file activity detection, threshold for file activities, your alert volumes. So if you feel like you're getting too much, you can actually squeeze this down a little bit, depending on what you want. It's my demo environment, so the more alerts I have, the better it is to demo with. And then you've got, again, the Microsoft ATP alert statuses, so you can select these on. Then you have unallowed domains. So within here, you can actually include domains in here, exclude domains in here that you don't want data to be shared to. And again, down here you have the opposite of that, where you would want data to be shared to, whether that be specific cloud storage solutions that people or vendors or regulators use. So you can map that data in, upload that data into there. Then you've got third-party domains. So if you deal with sister companies or companies that you would share data with, let's take a car manufacturer, for example, they deal with many different other companies to build out components. So you can add those domains in here so you can be sure that the data being shared is actually monitored. Then you have export alerts, speaks for itself. You can use the management API here. Priority groups is a good one as well. You can actually create this out for VIP users or specific people within projects, as I have here. So this would have a number of people in here, as I show you now. And then you can keep a closer eye on those people. I see this being used quite a lot for acquisitions and mergers, or specific secret projects within companies that are not known to other employees. Also within here, I see this being used for VIP users, so your CXO, executive level people. They will be put into a group and they will be monitored, if you like, from an extensibility perspective. Then you have the priority physical access. So as I alluded to before, if you want to have IRM detect and block particular access to certain areas within your building or floors or data centers, you would do that in here, and you would include that asset list here. Power Automate flows. I'm sure this needs no introduction. You can build Power Automate flows to build graphical insights to what's happening in your environment. Microsoft Teams, another great one from Microsoft here, where if you have a report come through and you create a case, you have the ability to spin up a Microsoft Teams channel in the background and have real live communications with perhaps the user's manager or the user, the team lead, the compliance teams, whatever the case may be. It gives you that ability to have that real-time, in-time conversation instead of relying on email. Analytics, again, speaks for itself. You have the ability to turn on the analytic, and it will basically, as I showed you before, run through your environment and pick out any suspect data given the signals that IRM uses. Admin notifications, again, speaks for itself. You have the ability to switch these on or off for different variations or different RBAC groups inside of your environment. Let's go back and take a look at the policies. So selecting policies. I have a couple of example policies already set up, but I will walk you through on how one can be set up. So I have a Project Falcon one here. So let's take a quick look at this one. So inside the policy then, I've chosen one of the templates and I've just selected data leaks and then general data leaks, but I'm going to map in my own preferences to this because I want to be able to see who is talking about my special project, my fictitious project, which is Project Falcon. So initially you get the chance to add in a name and description as always. And then you come through to include all users and groups. Now you can include specific users or groups should you want to do so. But mainly in my demonstrations, I'll go through and select all. And then it will ask you, where do you want this to abide to? What do you want to prioritize? And where do you want to prioritize it? So I've selected choose my own. And then I've gone through to SharePoint and I've added my SharePoint sites in. And then I've come through to the sensitive information type. So as I alluded to back in the data classification walkthrough, I have a Project Falcon sensitive information type that just looks for project and Falcon. Very easy for me to demo. That's why I have it in here. But there are customers that I've dealt with that have built this out for specific requirements. Like I said, acquisition and mergers. And those acquisition and mergers will have a special name given to them. Project Millennium or Project whatever the case may be. Do you know what I mean? It's entirely up to the business how they do that. And then they'll map this into here. So now the business will know only certain people will be able to use or communicate this type of prioritized data. So this is where I would come. If you wanted to add one in your own, you would just select add or edit. Come through and select one of the sensitive information types you want to monitor for. Next, I have my sensitivity label that's been mapped into here. And again, you can use any sensitivity label of your choice. I've got my Project Falcon one in here, of course. And then you come through to the triggering events. Now, there's two possibilities that you can use here. You can choose the exfiltration activity, which is the top one, or you can build out a specific data loss prevention policy and then map that into the insider risk. So I know within my IRM policy, I've got specific options and specific configurations mapped into there that I want specifically within our IRM policy itself. And that's where you would map in. And any other DLP policy is available for you to choose within here. The exfiltration one doesn't need a data loss prevention policy. You can just switch it on and it will monitor for these two specific things here. However, there's quite a large threshold on them, so I don't see them being used quite that often due to the fact that if a user downloads more than 300 files per day, that in itself would be something suspicious in most of the environments that I've dealt with. And then you have user downloads more than 85 files that contain sensitive information types. Again, that one would be quite a large trigger for a lot of environments. So it's a good one to get started, don't get me wrong. So if you've got no data loss prevention policies already configured, you can come in here, select this, and just have a bit of an overview of what's happening in your environment. Even though they may not be triggering those thresholds, you can still have a variation of look of of what's going on. But more often than not, 9 times out of 10, I do see users using data loss prevention policy wrapped into an IRM policy. Then you have the policy indicators themselves. So as I alluded to before, you must turn these on within the global settings before they'll appear in here and be selectable in here. So I've got everything selected purely for the ease of the demo. And then next we have the thresholds. Now, as you can see in here, you can either use the default thresholds for indicators, or you can come through and select whatever you want them to be. Whatever numeric value you want them to be from an organization perspective, you can select them. I've made this very easy on myself to try and get as much data into the IRM alerting as possible. So I've just selected 1, 2, 3. They can't be the same value. They can't be 111 or 222. They'd have to be a frequency of numbers, so 1, 2, 3, or 100, 110, 120, and so on and so forth. There's a lot in there, of course, because they're mapped into the indicators and triggers that you've selected prior to this page. Then at the bottom, you have the ability to select a severity type, so a default, medium, or high. For mine, I selected high. And then you would come through to finish. And within here, we'll give you the opportunity to look through the actual settings that you've just inputted into the policy. Always review them and make sure they're exactly as you need them. And that would be it. You would just select submit, and that would go off and create that policy. Now, as it states at the top here, this can take up to 24 hours. So just be wary of that. So if you're demoing this out or you're testing this out, then I would always give yourself a few days to create the policy, then go and create some activity in the background, go and download a load of SharePoint data, or go and access a load of sensitivity labels that you don't generally access, and then wait another 24 hours for that data to materialize inside of the alerting portal itself. Next, let's take a look at the theft by departing users. So again, I've come through and I've chosen the data theft and the data theft by departing users template. Now on this one, as you can see, there's a few prerequisites that you can choose from. There's that HR connector that I was talking about before. And then optionally, you've got to detect activity on devices. You must have the devices onto the compliance center and device indicators. Now, that goes back to our previous conversation where we were talking about endpoint DLP. So if that machine is already enabled for endpoint data loss prevention, then they're already onboarded into the compliance center. The IRM policy will use the same technology in the background to go and grab the data from the device perspective. So you would need this on in all cases, I would say, if you're trying to protect sensitive information. And then you've got the physical badging connector. So that physical site access card, what do you want to do with it when you're triggering an event or a user's score reaches a certain point? What is it that you want for it to do? And then you've got the triggering events as standard. Again, I've got include all users and group here. I've got all of my SharePoint and so on and so forth to go through. I don't want to specify any sensitive, any priority data at the moment. I want to basically include everything. Then I've got user account deleted from Azure AD. So this is where the HR connector will pick on any of that type of information, if you like. Again, all of the indicators I have switched on just for demo purposes. And then next would be your threshold. On this one, I've chosen use the default ones. And that's it. So if you have a user that has an account deleted from Azure AD, here's where those triggers would come in. You can also put different configurations in there as well for terminating or user that's resigned and so on and so forth. Very, very good tool from Microsoft. Let's take a look at the alerting side. So as we can see in here, we have a number of alerts going back the last 7 days and the last 3 months. Now, each one of these will come with its own variation of overview. So we can see that Christine here has actually triggered an alert. So we can come in and see that she's triggered the policy, the DLP policy for Project Falcon. More so, we can come down to have a look at the content detected. So we can see the top labels, so one item with the sensitivity label applied to it. Then the top sensitive information types, the top keywords, top SharePoint sites, top SharePoint site with labels, top recipients and any recipient domains that may have been detected during those items, whether they've been shared or emails or so on and so forth. Then we can come up and have a look at the actual Activity Explorer as well. So what this will give you is the items themselves of which is triggered, or if Christine has gone through and downloaded a lot of items, it will show you those in here. You can come through to each of the items and select the blue hyperlink, and that will take you straight to the actual item itself. From there, you can take a look at the item and see what the actual alert gives you. Furthermore, you can go through each of them and select whichever one you want. So let's come and have a look at the one with the access sensitive SharePoint files. Let's select this item. Okay, and then you can select that, and again you get a more detailed overview of what that item is, where it is, who it belongs to, who it's shared with, the actual item ID. Very, very detailed information inside of here. Additionally, what you can do is you can confirm all alerts and create a case, but I've already got a case open, so let's go and take a look at that one. So you come back to the main screen then, and then you come to cases. So any of those alerts that you saw in there, if you are certain that there wasn't accidental and it was intentional, you can actually create that case. And when you create that case, it gives you the opportunity to open that case and view the details within it. So within here, you have a plethora of information. We have case overview, we have the alerts that's triggered, we have the user activity, the Activity Explorer, and the Content Explorer, any case notes, and any contributors to this particular case itself. Additionally, within the case actions, you have the ability to send an email notice, escalate for investigation, which will open an advanced e-discovery case and pull all of the data, into the advanced e-discovery case for you, which I think is a fantastic option. Then you have automate, speaks for itself. You have the ability to share this. You can share it within an email or within a link. And then you have that Microsoft Teams channel I was talking about in the background, which opens that chat for you to have that discussion on a live time. So coming over to case overview then, you can see about this case. So the case information, it's active. The case was created on this date, and the Microsoft team is active. Then you've got the user details. So the user risk score is 100 out of 100. So on this particular one, I went to all of the SharePoint sites that I had and pulled as much data down as I possibly could. Then, now you can see that in here within the content detected, which I'll get to in a minute. Then we have the user, which is Megan. Then we have the organization and department where they're working within, the manager's name, and then the manager email. Then you have the alert. So what policies has Megan triggered? Okay, and she's triggered 2 of those policies that we created. That's the general data leaks exfiltration policy, which is the default one you do not need a DPL policy for. And then there's a Project Falcon one, which is the data leak policy, which is an actual data loss prevention policy. Then again, we come down to the content detected. And this one, of course, it's different because on this one, I've just gone through and tried to get as much information down as possible. And we have top labels, 16 sensitivity labels of activity within those documents. Top sensitive information types, there are 9 of. Top keywords, of which there are 65. Top SharePoint sites, which there are 106. Sensitivity labels, of which there are 12. Recipients, and then recipient domains. So I've tried to upload information to Dropbox. The top one was G Suite. I'm not too sure why that's disappeared. And then you have the additional SharePoint sites in there for different tenants as well. Then we come to the alerts. And we can see the alerts within here, so we can select that particular policy and have a look what is triggered within that policy. So if the user's triggered a number of policies, of course you can come in here and choose every single one of them and look at the count and look at the alerts within there to see what's actually happened with each of them. Then we have the user activity and this great graph here where you can select on deletion or exfiltration or whatever the case may be. This goes back 6 months, so you can go back the full 6 months and have a look. Again, very similar view. You can select these and have a look at the actual items under the Activity Explorer where it was coming to next, and then the items themselves, and then the report on the items themselves. Again, you can come through here, select on these. Excellent information. And then you've got the Content Explorer itself. And within here, you'll be able to see the documents themselves. I have an error here, but within here, you'll see the Word documents, the PowerPoint documents, the Excel spreadsheets, and so on and so forth. You can actually click on them as we did in the data classification under Content Explorer and have a deep dive into those documents themselves to figure out what information is inside of them, what type of document are they, and whether or not they're labeled with a sensitivity label. And if they are, why? Is it highly confidential? Should Megan be viewing these? Should Megan be even trying to get access to these? Then we have the case notes. So in here, you can add in any particular notes that you want. We have the advanced e-discovery case, which I created under case actions and escalate for investigation. I can add in any notes that I want to in here, you know, checked for updates, save. Very, very good. And you can, anybody that's coming in here that has access to this particular case can see these notes as well. So you've got that notification of somebody's been in, someone's excluded a particular item as a day-to-day business activity for Megan, or it's not accidental, it's actually intentional, and she's tried to get this data out. And then we have the contributors. And within the contributors, of course, you can add in whoever you want to within a single user who has access to these permissions or within these single groups here. Let's go back to the main screen. Let's take a look at users. So these are all your users that are inside of any policies that you've got. You have the ability within here to filter them if you want to, or to choose any particular policy that you have mapped into here. So if you're not interested in seeing all of them, you can come in here and just select a certain one. Again, if you were to click on this one, it would give you a breakdown of that user and the user activity. So this user activity is pretty much there in all of the options that you can go through when it comes to the user, the policies, and the alerts themselves. I think this is great because you don't have to go into one specific place. You can just grab that data wherever you can do. Sometimes it's just an overview. Sometimes it's a deep dive, and sometimes it's just like this on the right-hand side where you just get this single pane coming up. But regardless, I think the data that's inside of here, the information that's inside of here is phenomenal. And that's a very quick overview of insider risk management. Let's take a look at communications compliance. So additionally, insider risk management includes communications compliance. Communications compliance provides the organization the ability to detect for workplace harassment, bullying, abusive or harassing behavior, profanity, whether that is internal or external communications via keywords and detections that you've created. So content that can be scanned is, again, harassment, bullying, profanity, threats, adult images, racy images, gory images, anything that would be seen as outside of your business etiquette, you can add in here and search for. Again, I have two policies here. I've had a nasty policy which I've set up, which I'll show you in just a moment, and then I have my sensitive information, which includes that Project Falcon. So let's take a look at this then. So on the right hand side, you have the ability to choose any of the default templates that Microsoft give you. So if you're looking at specific financial regulatory compliance where you have to prevent users from communicating, this is a great one. Or you want to monitor specific people for specific financial services types of information, then the financial regulatory compliance one would be for you. Additionally, we have monitor for inappropriate content. Now, I built my own out with these single information that's in here, but let's take a quick look at this one. Again, you can just come in here, create policy, or customize the policy if you like. But let's take a quick look at mine. So I come to edit. Here is where I would want that supervised users and groups to be. And then you have excluded users and groups within here. I've just set it to all users and just excluded not excluded anybody, but just included myself as a reviewer. Then I have the locations where I want to monitor. So we have Exchange, Microsoft Teams, Skype for Business, and Yammer. And here is where we will build out that communication set. So what do you want it to look for? What is the classifiers that you want to match? And here's the communication directions. You have inbound, outbound, and then internal. And here are the sensitive information types. So I've added these in myself. So each one of these here is actually included in the inappropriate behavior template, but I just wanted to build this out myself. And then again, you can add in specific sensitive information types or trainable classifiers within here. Sorry, trainable classifiers, not sensitive information types within here to look for that type of data. So if you wanted to create your own and look for something around diversity or whatever the case may be, you can add that in here. Or as I have with my configuration here, my default one. On my example then, we have some pending items that need to be reviewed, and we have some items that were already resolved. But let's take a look at this configuration that we have here within the policy and how I created that policy. Let's go to edit policy. Again, simple configuration at the front. Then within here, we want to be able to configure what users we want to supervise. So you can add all users, or you can select a particular group of users if you want. It's entirely up to you as an organization. So if you have a specific requirement that you want to detect or supervise for or inspect for certain types of sensitive information types or keywords or whatever the case may be, then you can add those in and add the relevant users to them rather than it being dispersed across the entire environment. Again, you have the opportunity here to exclude some users, and then your reviewers would be those who clearly need to review those items. Then we have the 365 locations again, Exchange, Teams, Skype, and Yammer. Communication directions, as before. And then we have, again, my sensitive information type, which just looks for Project and Falcon. Now, again, the easiest thing for me to do is minimize the actual keywords that I'm looking for, just so for my demo purposes, I can get as much information in there as I possibly can. All right. And then I've got in here the option to have message contains any of these words. So a high severity alert has been triggered. So I wanted to pull through as many items as I possibly could. So I added this in here because I knew this would get most of the alerts from the alerting system into the emails as well, just so I had some data to deal with. We also have the ability to use OCR, which I'm going to select now. And then you have review percentage. So if you feel like you're getting too much, you can actually bring these down to a level that you're more comfortable with. And then we'll go next. And of course, you have the ability to review that configuration before you commit and save it. So we'll do that now. And that's it. All done for you. So let's have a look at the sensitive information type and have a look at the actual triggers that's come through. So coming into the actual policy itself then, we can see that we have pending items and resolved items. Now, looking through here, you can see that there's been communication over email, and that email is actually the email that's generated for communication compliance or DLP rule match itself. Now, the reason why I've added that in there is just so I can have more of a visible alert, if you like. So if I come into the Microsoft Teams chat, and here you can see Adele has actually mentioned Project and Falcon. So this has come through. So if this would have been any harassment or bullying or racy images or gory images or threatening behavior or anything like that that you've got mapped in as a communications compliance policy, you get the opportunity to see that within here. Therefore, all you would need to do is take a look at the message and determine whether or not that message is compliant, non-compliant, or whether you want to remove the message from Teams itself. With that, you get some additional options down at the bottom here. So resolve, notify, tag as. So you can build out tagging and basically add it into, oh, I'm going to say this is questionable because Megan shouldn't be talking about this. Then you go and save it. On top of that, you have the ability to escalate or escalate for investigation. And again, that opens up an advanced e-discovery case. And you have some other options here where you can remove the message directly from in Teams, as you can do with the options that are above the actual message itself. So you can come up here and choose from one of these options up at the top here. The trash can showing you that you can remove this from Teams. Additionally, you get some information on the right hand side, which is your viewer pane. So you can see this in plain text, and it will actually highlight the words or the keyword dictionary that you have inside of that trainable classifier to go and look for, or that sensitive information type to go and look for. You have the ability to annotate as well. So if you wanted to remove the user's name or remove any other context, let's say there's something within here that's important, as I've got here, I've redacted this particular area, then you can do that. So you're not overlapping any data exfiltration whatsoever. Then you get the ability to have a look at the full thread. So if this was multiple threads going back and forth, you can have a look in here to have an overview of what the actual conversation looks like and how they got to talking about Project Falcon or how the bullying or harassment, whatever the case may be, has come about. Then you have user history. So are there any other policies then that this user has matched? Is this a repetitive theme for this user? Do they constantly share inappropriate stuff? Or do they constantly talk about things that they shouldn't be talking about? Then you can mark items for resolution. So as we've done here, we know this has come through. We know we can resolve this. We can add a comment in here. We can say not applicable, resolve, and that will then come through into the resolve section of the policy itself. Let's take a quick look at that. So in here, as you can see, I have lots of messages in here, but these would hopefully be messages that have no trigger, no investigation against them, or you've deemed them as non-worrying, if you like. All right, so let's take a look at that again. So that's communications compliance. You can build these out however you want. So let's build a test one. And what we'll do, we'll look for sensitive info. So within here, we'll call it sensitive information, FinServ. So let's look for financial services information. I want to include all my users. My reviewer will be my admin account. And then we'll come through here and look for the sensitive information types that we want to look for. So in today's demo, we're going to look for credit card data. Let's map that in. Okay. Now, down here we have custom policy or create policy. If you're just looking for something as simple as credit card, I would go for create policy. But if you want to be able to customize that policy and add in more data or have specific rules around it, I would click customize. I'm not going to go into that today for this overview. I will just select create policy. And away it goes in the background. Now this can actually take 24 hours, as with the IRM policies, to actually go and create and then go through your environment. As you can see here, you have activating. Once that is activated, once that configuration has been pushed service side, that will then be displayed rather as active, as you can see below. And that's it. That is my Microsoft 365 compliance and your organization. So hopefully there's some good tips and some good information in here that can help you adopt the Microsoft 365 compliance solutions for your organization. There's lots of tools in there. People find this overwhelming at times, but hopefully my review here has given you some insight and some ease to how you use them. So thank you very much. If you're still here, I'm very grateful and great kudos to you if you've made it all the way through here. But if you're at the end and you're looking for specific things, do flick through. Hopefully there'll be something around the solution that you're looking at with some information in there to give you a better understanding or to give you some tips and tricks on how to use it. More importantly, a massive thank you to everyone at the Festive Tech Calendar for giving me the opportunity to do this year in 2021. I've had a blast. It's been fantastic. So just to end then, Merry Christmas to everybody, and hopefully I'll see you next year.